Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are at the post-election night here in Vilnius, organized by the German Embassy, of course, and 15 Minutes, the news website. And my name is Gintaras Radauskas. I'm a 15 Minutes journalist, and here to discuss the provisional results and the whole campaign, we have His Excellency Ambassador Matthiasu Sonnu. How are you, Mr. Ambassador?
Excited would be the right description, I believe. We have probably the most exciting result that could come out of this election, in that two political parties come out at the top with exactly the same percentage points. So they both have a very similar justification or claim to form the new government. Perhaps I should say two words about the electoral system, because it's different from the Lithuanian system. In Germany, the head of government, the chancellor, the federal chancellor, is not elected by the people directly. It is an election in parliament. And with several parties in parliament, none of which has an absolute majority, you need a coalition. And the tradition is, of course, if one party is clearly in the lead, then that party will form a government. This is not the current situation, and things have changed over the last 4 days or so. Until then, it always looked like as if the Social Democrats would come out on top and the CDU slightly behind. Now they look exactly in the same position. That makes the whole game more interesting.
It sure does. This was really an unusually open election campaign, wasn't it, Mr. Ambassador? You know, the lead was once the Greens had the lead, and then the CDU had the lead at first, and the Greens, and then the Social Democrats, and now it's wide open, I guess, right? I mean, what do you think? Why do you think it was like this? Was it because it was clear for some time that, you know, Germany was going to have a new chancellor? Angela Merkel is leaving after 16 years. So that's what maybe made the race wide open. What do you think?
I think you are right, Gintaras. The fact that it was clear that the current federal chancellor, Angela Merkel, would not stand again did make a big difference. It introduced an element of, positively speaking, excitement. If you look at the risk factor, at the downside, an element of insecurity. And it was clear that all parties had difficulties dealing with this unknown situation. Possibly most of all, the federal chancellor's own political party, the so-called CDU-CSU, the Christian Democrats. They were very used, of course, to be led by a popular federal chancellor, and it was for them very easy, because they thought, well, people are voting for the federal chancellor, and then she forms the government. That means we are in government. This was no longer the case in this campaign, just as your question suggests, but it also sort of influenced the other political parties and their game, their election campaign.
Yeah, so let's dig into these numbers for a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are only exit polls, and as far as I understand, the almost 40% of the postal ballots are not included in these exit polls. So again, the numbers might change, even though the exit polls in Germany are usually very reliable, and we will soon have preliminary results as well this very evening. So it will get clearer and clearer what's the situation with the numbers. But I mean, you're a diplomat, I know, but let's say the Social Democratic Party comes first. According to one exit poll, it does, with 26%, and the CDU and CSU have 24%, the Greens have 15%, and the Liberals from the Free Democrat Party with 11%. So what do you think? Traffic light coalition is possible, Jamaica coalition is possible, the red, green, red, probably not, because the Linke is very close to even
borderline.
Getting the 5%. So again, do you think this or that coalition will be more likely this time
That is a
around?
question which
for
puts
you,
me
yeah.
in a hard situation.
Okay.
Because, of course, I am a politically neutral civil servant, and while I do have my preferences as a citizen, I cannot express them here. It's too early to say the likelihoods. It is not automatically a given that the party which has the highest number of votes will form the government, because any of these parties will need two other partners to form a coalition. That's also different from the past, where two parties were mostly sufficient to form a majority in parliament. This time it will clearly be three parties, and you know, when there is three people in a dance, it is a different dance from with only two partners. I would not now dare to predict which coalition will come out of it. It is easy to predict that both the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats will seek to find partners to form a coalition. In the case of the Christian Democrats, that would be the so-called Jamaica coalition, which would be the Christian Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, the FDP. In the case of the Social Democrats, it would be the so-called traffic light coalition, i.e. the Social Democrats, the Greens, and again, the Liberals. These are the two likeliest options, and both parties will try to bring these options about. It will take long. The only absolutely certain prediction we can make is that tomorrow, Monday morning, Angela Merkel will still be federal chancellor.
Sure.
This is part of our system, which is also interesting. Germany does not really have like an acting government. Our constitution always provides for a federal chancellor who is fully in charge constitutionally. And the only way to replace a chancellor is to elect a new one. And until that happens, this is the one certain prediction: Mrs. Merkel will remain the federal chancellor of Germany.
Right. Last time around, 4 years ago, right? I mean, it took 6 months for the new chancellor for the same chancellor to take off, right? I mean, the Christian Democrats were in negotiations with the Liberals for quite some time, but then the Liberals were dropped out of the race, and the Grosse coalition was working again. Do you envision this scenario again?
It could take quite a while. There will be, of course, I mean, when you look out there at the public television programs, you see, as always, after every democratic election, you only have winners, right? The politicians step in front of the camera and explain why this was a marvelous result. In here, we can look at it in a little more differentiated way, and we will see that there are parties that have done less well than they hoped for, and there are parties which have done about as well as was to be expected. And there will be poker playing going on, right? Particularly as we have probably two political parties with an equal, more or less equal legitimacy in claiming the leadership for them.
Yes, for the CDU, 25% is, if that is the right number, is the worst result in the post-war federal election. I mean, that's probably important. But I wanted to ask you, this is just, I guess, me talking, but it would seem to me, again, political change in Germany, when I report on foreign events, I see United States, right? And I mean, when the Democrats or the Democratic candidate for a president topples a Republican or vice versa, you know, they cancel stuff. Basically, the climate change or whatnot, it's very dramatic, it's very, we're going to do it our way. And in Germany, it would seem to me, again, there's a lot of continuity, always. Stability is important. Even boredom, in some sense, in politics is important, right? I mean, whoever builds the coalition, right? I mean, the issues will be the same. The economy, climate change is getting more and more important, whoever is in charge, right?
Yes.
In Europe, at least. I mean, there's no such far-right government, big party as in America, which denies science, basically. At least in Germany, there isn't. AfD is not in the picture for any other party. But am I wrong? Do you think there's just stability is very important for Germans, for the parties as well as the voters, and that's why not very much will change, really.
Interas, I can only say I could hardly have put it better than your question already did. Germans
still try.
Germans are, the psychology is one of skepticism. I said this before in my little speech. Germans are risk averse and scarred still 80 years later by the experience of the 20th century. Big ambitions, big changes, anything radical, anything deeply ideological is viewed with suspicion. Politicians know this, and they know that the many things that Germany will have to do in the next 4 years, because there is a lot to do, and you mentioned some of the issues, that you have to do it gently, so that people don't get skittish and scared. And that is why I believe your prediction that not much will immediately change is completely correct. And that is relevant, I think, also for our European partners. Lithuania can rely on Germany remaining the country that they have come to rely on in many ways, like our cooperation and security policy within NATO. Germany will remain an anchor of transatlantic linkage of Europe, even if the question is obvious that Europe will have to decide what more it can do within NATO. But there is definitely not the slightest risk that, you know, when the new government comes into power, that everything suddenly changes. Germans do not like surprises. They like gradualism. They like to take it step by step. And that is part, I believe, of why our current federal chancellor has been in power for so long. She understood this very well, and she knew how to induce changes in a gentle way.
Yeah, finally, I wanted to ask you about the outgoing Federal Chancellor Angela Merkel. She's still going to be Chancellor tomorrow and the day after and the week after, I guess, but she is leaving sooner or later after 16 years in office. Could you define her legacy to Germany, to Europe, and to the world?
I would say dependability and reliability, and the avoidance of any kind of sudden movements or surprises. Not just because the German electorate's psychology favors a gradual approach, but also because Germany is, you know, relatively speaking, such a big player in Europe. It is also it has always been part of Chancellor Merkel's legacy to patiently and carefully take our European partners along with us, and to never go and say, you know, Germany wants this in this way, or we need to do this. She was always somebody who created consensus for things she thought were necessary, and certainly always avoided, creating hype or whatever, because her experience, like the German experience, is that this will lead to backlashes. And, we remember, you may remember it, there was talk in the international media about Germany's leadership role in Europe and whatnot. And Germans are not confident that they should have such a role. And their experience, our experience is, whenever Germany does try to openly lead somewhere, the backlash will be strong. And that is why in the European ambit as well, the approach is gradual and gentle and will remain so.
Okay. I thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and enjoy the rest of your evening and this wonderful post-evening night here in Vilnius.
I really look forward to listening to you, Gintaras, talking with the real experts who are already waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We continue the program tonight. I would like to remind you again the exit polls which show that the Christian Democrats are on 25%. The Social Democrats are also on 25%. In another exit poll, they are in the slight lead. The Greens enjoy 15% support, the Free Democrats 11%. Die Linke is around 5% barrier, which means that they are not even sure if they're going to enter the new Bundestag. To continue the program, like Mr. Ambassador said, I have two real experts here with me. Ms. Margarita Šešelgytė, who is the head of the Institute of International Relations and Political Science here at the Vilnius University. Hello.
Good evening.
And Šarūnas Liekis, who is a social studies doctor at the Vytautas Great University and the dean of the politics faculty there as well, right?
Good evening, yes.
So let's maybe try to discuss the election which took place today in Germany. Mr. Liekis, it was a really exceptional campaign, wasn't it? I mean, it was really dynamic. The lead changed in the polls quite a few times as well. So what is your impression of this campaign? And again, what do you think the most likely coalition will work in the nearest future in Germany?
To guess about the coalition is probably I would say very difficult, task to anybody to do. But when we speak about the campaign was colorful. We saw ups and downs for all the participants during few months. If we look at the results of the polls starting with March of this year, we see, very dynamic changes. And we see for a long time CDU coming in the front of all the political parties, suddenly dropping down probably from July. And all this is in the context of COVID, flood in Rhine-Westphalia, retreat from Afghanistan. And most probably, these recent changes, I would predict, are related to the changes of the general German public towards the public good. In a sense, very often we ask how government is good for the business, but nobody asks how government is good for the governance. So I think the issues of governance in times of, calamities, misfortunes, wars, and epidemics are coming into the forefront, and then people start. They basically get interested, to what extent government performs securing their rights, their health, their general security, etc., etc. So I would like to wrap up on here.
Okay, but Armin Laschet was, the ambassador is not here anymore. He wouldn't say anything anyway, but I mean, Armin Laschet was a pretty unattractive candidate for the CDU, wasn't he?
Depends on the style, on let's say on the aesthetics.
Compare it to Angela Merkel.
Yeah, but if you compare Angela Merkel to Helmut Kohl,
okay.
Yeah, so everything is relative. So,
right, Margarita, how important do you think, however it ends, whatever the coalition will be, how important for the whole EU, the European Union, was this election and, shall we say, not only this election, but the end of Merkel? How important is it for Europeans, for European politicians, for European people, for different countries, for us, Lithuanians? I mean, what is there over the post-Merkel horizon, do you think?
Thank you for the question. I believe that Germany is one of the most influential countries in the European Union, and Merkel was, by all means, probably the most influential politician in European Union for a number of years, 16 years. She's been very solid leader. She went throughout the crisis, the Euro financial crisis, migration crisis, now COVID crisis. She demonstrated herself as a wonderful leader, capable of forming coalitions, capable of striking the deals. Sometimes even those deals doesn't match the interest of Germany 100%, as was with the situation with the European reconstruction fund, post-COVID fund, and the issue of the joint borrowing, but still being able to explain as well to the German society why it was important. So Germany has proved itself as a leader of the European Union on a number of occasions, but due to the capacities of Angela Merkel. And I recall one study conducted by the Council on Foreign Relations quite recently. That was pan-European level study, survey, which showed that Europeans were very much supportive towards the German leadership in general on a number of issues: economy, finances, rule of law, democracy, but also they were very much supporting for Mrs. Merkel. And there was a very interesting question asking, if you were to elect the president and you should choose between two candidates, Madame Merkel and Monsieur Macron, so whom would you choose? And the results struck me because it was 41% for Angela Merkel and 40% for Monsieur Macron, including in France, Madame Merkel has won. And the survey included very different countries, from Denmark to Spain and Portugal, so the frugals and the southerners. So even for the southerners, for whom probably Angela Merkel demonstrated the queen of austerity during the financial crisis, they were still voting for her. So what does it show? That she has managed to bring into European Union this trustworthy pan-European face, where people have faith in her, and she represents stability. As ambassador was telling about the German society, that they like stability. So it seems that by the Madame Merkel, stability came into Europe, and European Union countries like the stability. So it is very important, because in this very difficult situation with great power rivalry, new challenges from climate change and hybrid attacks from the big countries, there is a need for stability, and all eyes is on Germany.
Do you think this stability will endure? I mean, without Merkel? Like Ambassador said, and we talked with him before, I mean, in Germany, okay, 16 years of CDU in charge basically is a lot of time, and if CDU is not taking part in the next government, change is coming, but it's not probably going to be dramatic.
Of course, I don't believe in drama in that sense, because I look at Germany, and it's not a drama country, so there won't be probably big changes. And what else? I think that, for Germany as a country, stability matters, trustworthiness matters, but it's also about the commitments. So whatever commitments Germany has at the moment, I think that they will be followed. The only caveat which probably makes me puzzled is to what extent very calm, technocratic leadership is the style of the leadership that European Union will be needed in, let's say, 5 years, with all these, geopolitical challenges, with the problems of rule of law inside the Europe, with these value divisions. At some point, probably there will be a need for more assertive leadership in naming the things and pushing forward. And that's probably, that could be an opportunity for the new chancellor to bring the new face of Germany into European Union, more assertive on certain issues. For instance, climate change issues will be needing a lot of attention. And I've seen that the Greens, that's been on the agenda of Greens for years, but now I see that CDU is also very much putting on the top priority list. That is important. But also transatlantic link, also defense issues, that's going to be a very interesting perspective. What will be the position on the defense in Germany and defense in Europe of the next Chancellor of Germany?
Right. I wanted to move on to defense, actually, Mr. Liekis. What about defense? Right. Like Margarita says, I mean, Americans beat Trump, beat Obama, beat Biden administration. I mean, these officials keep telling NATO European members that to invest more in defense, to provide more share of the GDP to defense issues. And Germany is not one of those countries who have been investing 2% of the GDP each year to defense issues. And let's project, let's say, the Social Democrats and the Greens and the Liberals form the next coalition, let's say, right? I mean, defense, then what happens to defense? Because I would presume there's a consensus in Germany about this, but also at the same time, they do have, at least on paper, bigger priorities right now, right? The economy, climate change. And there's a moment when you have to, I guess, choose where to divert the money, the budget. And you have to kind of choose, right, to protect yourself and the climate, and you protect yourself with investing in defense. Or is it compatible, in your opinion?
Usually, like in all, you make political choices, and your priorities very much depend on the context, on the international context. And when we think and we speak usually about this 2% for Germany, technically all Germans are worried a little bit if they get 2% of the budget, 2% of GDP for the military. German military budget will be higher than the Russian military budget, so it's a little bit worrying for them. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but also it's at least from kind of historical memory, probably perspective, if to look at the issue, or kind of it's a sensitive issue. This kind of question of militarism in Germany is a very sensitive issue. And for example, this year, when we compare French military budget and German military budget, we see that basically they are comparable. Small differences, few 100 million euros. But you see what French do with the money they invest and what Germans do. I mean, the French have, nuclear-powered carriers, they have, submarines, they have expeditionary forces, they have foreign legion, so many things, for the same budget, basically this year, if you compare. We don't take historically, because the budgets were different, but, this year. And what Germans have, the general reputation of German military force, in nowadays, that half of the planes are not flying, etc., etc. You hear it constantly in different conferences, let it be military or not military, on politics. So it's clear that, with this changing environment, and I think this AUKUS issue, for example, East Asia, Far East, how it depends on your perspective. But overall, these issues will be a challenge for Europe, and the Germans will have to take a stand. They don't like to take the stand. They traditionally used not to take the stand, but I think with this new Bundestag, with this new term and new political powers and new combination of political powers in place in Germany, we will see certain changes. And I think we will see certain changes in the posture and as well as in the emphasis as well, which is, I hope it will be based also with certain money moves in the direction of increase. And it will not be related to this kind of scare of not filling out, requirements for NATO commitment for 2%. I think you see in Europe, I mean, we have some countries like Greece, usually, 2.5% usually they, spend on the military, and where we have different countries, and but the reaction of the countries and their military budgets usually reflect the perception of the threat. So if this perception is changing in Germany, we will see. I mean, we don't know at the moment, but at least keeping in mind the August Macron, as a who probably will go for the second term. So we'll see a lot of changes. Mm-hmm. And actually for Lithuania, this will be a kind of problematic because, Lithuania will have to make certain choices which it doesn't like to do also for many years.
Mm-hmm. Margarita, what do you think? I mean, I keep coming back to climate change in my head because 2 or 3 million new voters vote in each German or whatever election in Europe, and I presume the ones who go every Friday to protest against inaction on climate change, they do vote on issues like that. I mean, they care about that more than they care about, let's say, the threats. Like, in their heads, it's pretty abstract, right? Like China, Russia, they don't think about it every day, and they see climate change, they see these terrible floods in Germany. In West Germany, this is not Bangladesh, this is not Malaysia, this is not somewhere, Florida. This is West Germany where no flooding has taken place for ages, and this is very close now. And the drought as well this summer in Europe. I mean, these people are thinking, the younger ones, they're thinking about this issue, not about militaries, I guess.
But of course, look at the agenda of Greens. They've been growing their supporters on this green agenda. However, have to admit as well that, foreign defense issues are not the vital issues in the elections. So these are the issues for the elites. Yeah. And society in general do not participate so much on the decisions on foreign and defense policy. Probably it's a bit different in Lithuania because for us defense is a major issue, security is a major issue. So the discussions in the society are pretty heated over some issues like Russia, cyber defense, total defense, but it's not in the case of Germany. So of course younger voters will be voting for the issues like climate change, and it's not only the German scenario. All over Europe, climate change will be bringing up more people to the polling stations to ask, to demand the politicians to do their job on these issues, to solve these issues. But once the political parties reach their destination, for this instance Bundestag, once the coalitions are formed, they will have to also sit together and decide what's going to be their position on the defense, because there are a lot of changes. Šarūnas was already mentioning a couple of them, like AUKUS, what to do with the United States. I read the programs of the political parties. I think the CDU is most pro-transatlantic, although all the these parties who could be in the coalition, they agree that it's very important. But again, Greens, Social Democrats, even FDP, they also stress the importance of the European Union. All of them stress the importance of the European army. So what's going to be their positions on our position on the European army? What's going to be the position of Germany in the European army? The Greens said that they don't see the probably a lot of sense of investing twice on the national capabilities and the European capabilities, that probably you can invest on the European capabilities more. And these will be the decisions that those people will have to make. But I don't think that the society will be involved so much in these discussions, because it's too, technical, it's too far away. For society, what matters, what are the taxes and how, the taxes are distributed and the budget is distributed. So as far as the budget is not increasing a lot, so I don't think that the society will be very vocal on those issues.
Okay. One more thing. We have to talk about Russia. Of course, let's imagine for a second, I mean, if the Greens are in coalition, and they will most definitely will be in the coalition, I guess, unless there's another big coalition between the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. But if the Greens are forming the next government as well, let's say Olaf Scholz or Laschet is the prime minister, Annalena Baerbock, the Green candidate, is being mentioned as a possible minister for foreign affairs. And the Greens, well, at least what I have seen, they've been quite critical on Russia, publicly at least, outspoken on human rights, very disapproving of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Do you think, if the Greens are in government, Sharunas, do you think will this stance on Russia, could it change in Germany? I mean, Heiko Maas was critical on Russia at first when he took took office, but then somehow the system swallowed him, right? I mean, the whole German kind of attitude was winning against whatever individual preferences Heiko Maas might have had. But what do you think might happen with the Greens in office?
I think Margarita mentioned already about the taxes. I mean, it's much of the things will depend on the decisions, to increase the taxes, because usually, I mean, to have the green agenda, you have to have economy first, and then, to tax economy rather heavily. And we know all these, for example, energy strategies, let it be Lithuania, for example, to 2050, is basically at what expense, how much, where from, when you start looking at the money flow, etc., you see that mostly, for example, in the Lithuanian case, this is EU funded entertainment, okay? But what do you do in the country like Germany, which is a donor country? And with this kind of attitude and position towards nuclear power or gas, the French interest, we don't have to forget the French interest with the nuclear power stations. To what extent you'll be able to implement green agenda, not heavily taxing and not having polluting industries as well. I mean, in order to go forward with green agenda, you need also polluting industries in a sense. I mean, which are cheaper to produce, because energy produced from the green sources needs to be subsidized. Usually, this is the practice overall. I mean, in the large picture. I mean, unless you are doing somewhere, with hydro energy somewhere in Norway or in Sweden. I mean, but overall, so these questions are strategic questions, and every government, when it comes to practicalities of strategic nature and long-term nature, usually they are somehow succumbing. They are trying to retreat, and this is the example you gave of Maas. I mean, this is, I think, it's a good example, because these are very practical issues. What to do, how to balance off. At the expense of inflation. How do you play the whole game in economy? And these choices are not easy, and very often this kind of ideological approach, and what we know, even from the example of Lithuania, I mean, pure ideological approach without calculations, kind of grudging, being very kind of strong basis in accountancy, even, a kind of cost-benefit analysis. You cannot go further. I mean, we have a lot of examples, like that even recently. Let it be, especially when it comes to energy sector. And because all the examples and the relationship with Russia is connected to energy issues mostly. So these issues will be a serious challenge to the future German government.
Right. I mean, okay, Margarita, so what do you think? how do you think Germany's relation vis-à-vis Russia might change in the next government? Is it possible that some dramatic, escalation on the rhetorics front or even on the real action front? I mean, Angela Merkel was always in favor of renewing the sanctions for certain actions of Russia in Ukraine and Crimea. And do you think this will change, or the continuity will happen in this case as well?
Yeah, I think that the ambassador has put it quite well, that the Germans do not like surprises, so continuity is good. And in terms of German position vis-à-vis Russia, there are a lot of lobbies, and this position is very balanced, and lobbies pro-Russian and anti-Russian, this idealistic versus mercantilistic approach in all the parties, because all the parties are in a way somehow connected to the businesses, and there is a lot of businesses which are involved in Russia or which are cooperate with Russia in Germany, and that came from the very beginning of the German reunification and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. There was this very big belief in Germany that Russia might be democratized if it could be connected with Europe. So let's make it interdependent, in particular in the area of trade, and Russia will democratize. And then they were doing this very meticulously in a German way, bringing more Russia in the energy sector, in other sectors. So now it's very intertangled, and it's impossible just to take Russia away. So it's going to be there. And when you look, in Germany, and we're talking about the threat perception, so it's also geography a bit further away from us, and also the size. In our eyes, Russia is, huge, with huge military resources, and also a very huge impact on us due to the historical past, historical legacy. So for Germany, it's a bit different. So Russia is going to be there. But the only thing what I can see, and what I'm hearing from the leader of the Greens, and why she's bringing up these issues of democracy, because it matters for the young generation, not because of Russia itself, but also of the autocratic leaders in Belarus and China. And we will see in the forthcoming years more and more of these rivalries between the democracies and autocracies, and we will have to choose. So in that sense, I could envisage that there will be opportunities for the harsher rhetoric vis-à-vis Russia, vis-à-vis Belarus, and vis-à-vis China.
Okay. Šarūnas, what do you think?
We have to remember that Merkel, I think, all in all, visited Putin like over 20 times. I mean, I don't remember how many, 24 probably. I lost my count, how many times they met. And we don't have to take this from the scenery. In a sense, we don't have, to forget the very fact that, despite sanctions, despite rhetorical stance, let it be on Crimea, on Ukrainian issues, on Belarus, or overall human rights record of Russia or China. So there is an open channel of communication, for sure. I mean, it's moving forwards and backwards. There is a lot of discussion. Margarita mentioned different lobbying groups. I mean, you take the scenery of the think tanks in Berlin or in Hamburg or wherever. I mean, you see constant exchange of groups, discussions, seminars. So in a sense, Russia is rather visible in Germany, and it's perceived as a part of this European conundrum, I would say, even, because Europe in this strategic geopolitics is very often not seen without Russia. It's like two wings, so it's like Western Europe, and go to Vladivostok. So this kind of thinking is coming, from the end of 19th century, and you take, for example, the work of German geopolitics, even before the Second World War, and, so you see that this kind of thinking is present. So Russia is seen as a place which has to be integrated somehow into this European security and political architecture, not left away. And how to do it, there are different visions. Lithuania has a particular point of on that. You remember from first Grybauskaitės and Putin's meeting in St. Petersburg, nothing happened, for 10 years, not a single meeting. So Lithuania is in a particular place in European context. Also, if you compare to the German stance. So a lot of things to be seen. I completely agree with this position that a lot of things will happen because of politicians improvising to the general international climate and also in context. I mean, very much will depend naturally on the United States. How further develop U.S. politics vis-a-vis EU and NATO.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we can all agree that German-Russian relations are a different and quite big topic, which we can talk about for 2 hours, I guess. But we don't have that much time. We have to follow what's up with the German election results as well. I thank you, Margarita. I thank you, Šarūnai. My name is Gintaras. I thank you for watching as well. This is the German election night event, which is probably almost over because we're going to go and watch what's up with the results and how the coalitions are being formed. Thank you again, and good night.